Thank you, Minister Hallen. I knew he wouldn't let me down. Lots of tweets coming in. We're kickstarting a conversation, so join us on Twitter. You in the hall, you at home. The hashtag is LP15. We've had quite a few coming in from that first conversation. Dave Riley is someone who has had to go to Germany for the last 3 summers to get work. Great to hear Jack Eustace talking about youth immigration. My own tweet is at Nora Casey, by the way. David Whelan, many new opportunities are opening up in our rapidly growing economy. We've made great sacrifices. Now we can reap the rewards. Senator John Whelan, good apprenticeships for in-demand trades and skills is the back to the future way forward for well-paid careers and real jobs. And finally, Patrick Pugh, I don't think he's the real one, at Derek Nolan has said that the amount of shopping on Shop Street is on the up and the recovery is beginning to be felt in Galway, and that was without me shopping when I was there. Now we're going to change the chat. We're going to talk about how we create a more equal society in Ireland. We'll touch on, I suppose, education. We're going to talk about health, and we're also going to talk about gender issues. I'm joined by a brand new panel, so please welcome Ministers Jan O'Sullivan, Aodhán Ó Ríordáin and Kathleen Lynch, Deputies John Lyons, Joanna Tuffy and Joe Costello, and Senators John Kelly and Ivana Bacik. So let's go to the floor for the next question. Labour Party member from Dunleary, Anthony Muldoon. Over to you, Anthony.
Panel, we've seen great improvements in the past number of years in the reading, writing and math skills of young people in schools, and there's been a decrease in the number of pupils leaving school early, but we're still seeing a big difference in the addresses of our third level students. How are we going to deal with that inequality in the next few years?
It's just, Anthony, can I take you back to the podium there for a second? Sorry. Could you just explain that just a little bit more about what you meant in terms of inequalities?
In terms of the addresses, like the areas where our third level students are coming from. So it might be, like in Dunleary, for instance, it might be areas like Foxrock where 90–95% of 18-year-olds go to college, but in Sallynoggin it might only be 30 or 40%. And that's been a problem since, 80s, 90s, past 10 years.
I thought that's what you meant.
How do we deal with that issue?
Okay, so addresses. And so I'll go first to you, Minister Jan O'Sullivan. So I grew up in the Phoenix Park, went to an inner city school, have spent my whole life being plagued by people saying, where did you go to school, trying to pigeonhole me into some sort of area. There was no expectation of anybody in my school going on to further level education. There was no expectation of people going to university. So it was ever thus. Yeah. How do we change it?
Well, I think first of all, the intervention at an early stage is very important to ensure that you get that early start. So that's one of the areas that I've put really strong emphasis on, because if a child loses at that stage, then they may never have the opportunity to catch up. Yeah, so I see that as an equality measure for children as well as one for parents. But also the literacy and numeracy that we've just been asked about, because Ruairi Quinn, my predecessor, when he came into office, he started to implement a Labour Party policy of a literacy and numeracy strategy, and that has shown real results, the first real improvements in skills, measurable improvements in terms of maths, in terms of reading and writing. And that means then the children can be equal at that stage in their schooling. And then when they get on to a later stage, then they have a chance, if they stay on in school, they have a chance of going on to higher education. Now, I would also say that we had a very passionate debate last night, actually, on this whole area of access to higher education, and the Labour Party is very passionate about this area. But I think also, if I could refer back to the earlier discussion where Alex and William and others talked about apprenticeships, because I think we need to certainly ensure that there's access to higher education, but we also need to offer that other opportunity. And that's why I've set up an apprenticeship council. It's why we've managed to double the number of traditional apprentices in the last couple of years.
I'm sorry to cut across you, Minister, but how long is that going to take to
well, they've already had a call for proposals. So what we're doing is we're engaging, and any time I meet industry, I bring it up with them. We're engaging in other sectors that haven't traditionally had apprenticeships to encourage them.
Can I raise something with you about literacy and numeracy? So I was pretty devastated. I've just been working with traveller families for the last year for that new series on RT1, and I couldn't believe, the Supreme Court and the ruling about admissions policy, because if ever there was a way in which you could have solved inequalities, that was one, where previous generations of that family hadn't gone to school, so they couldn't possibly have had a sibling or a parent or a grandparent who had been to school.
I saw those programmes, Nora, and I was really impressed by the entrepreneurial spirit of those young women.
They're amazing. And by the way, then if you would have heard Anne Rose, who is 27, who never learned to read or write, who left school at 10, and time and again those girls were telling me about being pushed to the back of the class, being put into remedial classes, nobody caring about them, giving them colouring books, not actually helping them to develop. And interestingly, Leanne, who comes from Cork, from Fermoy, she was the one who talked about how amazing her teacher was, how she pulled her out of the class, and how she introduced her to the idea. She said she'd never even known what university was, and she went to Crawford.
And they're the kind of barriers we need to break down. And, you know, I have an admissions to schools bill, which I'll be publishing before Easter, and under that we will be ensuring that schools have open admission policies and that they specifically don't discriminate against travellers or other people on the various equality measures. But can I just say one other thing about, specifically in relation to the question, and John Lyons is sitting over there at the end. John will remember I was in a school in his constituency recently, in Finglas, and that school had developed a relationship with the closest university to them, which was Dublin City University. And they were introducing the girls in the school to a relationship with the university while they were still in secondary school. And I think that is a very practical way in which you can, for students where maybe their family had never had a tradition of going on to higher education,
and I think
that you actually, and a lot of the universities are doing this, they're having access programs, they're bringing people in while they're still in school.
And we'll come back to, I'm going to come back to access programs because I sat on the trust at DCU, so I know all the good work they do, particularly with Ballymun. But I'm going to bring in Joanna Tuffy actually, because you're, well, first of all, your family is totally steeped in education, but secondly, you chair the Oireachtas Committee on Education and Social Protection. So if anyone knows the answer, Joanna, you do.
Well, I don't have all the answers, but just in relation to the point that was made by Anthony Muldoon there, there areas where there was a low participation rate at third level, that rate of participation rate did improve greatly in the years immediately after the abolition of third level tuition fees. And, you know, for example, in Clondalkin, which is in my constituency, it had a low participation rate in the past, but in the 10 years after the abolition of tuition fees, the participation rate more than doubled. So, like, it did have an effect, but I think there's an element where maybe that effect has stalled and there's much more that needs to be done. So
what kind of things are you discussing in the committee at the moment?
Well, we obviously look, we've had a good look at the third level. Like, we look at all the sectors, and like, this is very much an issue that needs to be dealt with by, you know, what you do at first or prime or national school level, second level and third level. So you need to reform all of the levels of education to deal with this issue. And I mean, one of the areas we'd be looking at would be reforms to the third level sector to make it more accessible to people who wouldn't traditionally have gone to third level, or their families wouldn't have. So, like, you need to provide a much more flexible model of education, you know. I mean, like, one issue I think is that we need to look at, you know, people who mightn't have had an opportunity in the past to go to third level. We have to facilitate them getting the opportunity later on through second chance education. I think we need to look at the funding of part-time education, and that's something that would have been discussed at our committee. You know, so I think that's one important area, but there's lots of other things, like the Springboard, the investment in Springboard, where people who are on the live register could access free third level education, and thousands have already facilitated or availed of that facility. Like, I think that's an important development.
Joanna, come back in again a little bit later on, but I wanted to go to Mary Moran, Senator Mary Moran at the back, because, well, first of all, you've done it. You've been a teacher for a long time in Dundalk before you went into politics. But also you have a particular passion. When I talk about it, I think one of the worst inequalities in the world is access to education, but you also have a passion for people, perhaps with special needs, and whether or not we put another layer of inequality on top of that.
Absolutely, Nora, and that's certainly something that I found throughout you're giving away my age now, saying how long I've been teaching, but it certainly was something that I found in school, and I do think that we are making headways in that. I mean, we now, for example, will have more, with the increase in more SNAs, we'll now have more SNAs in our schools than ever before. There's an increase in resource teachers as well, and that is the key to it, I think, is to provide inclusivity. When we look at the amount of additional special classes that there are within mainstream schools, I think that's vitally important. It's vitally important from an educational point of view, but it's also very important from a social point of view.
And are there enough of them, Mary? That's so I suppose.
Well, I absolutely agree. I think we still have huge inroads to make, and I think but we are starting to make progress.
But is it about short-termism? You know, I'm involved in a charity called Will.i.am. Adam Harris, amazing boy. Interviewed him first on News Talk when he was facing his Leaving Cert, and talked about the value of SNAs and how he was able to progress to Leaving Cert standard. He's now at university, well, actually at the helm of a national charity for young people. So, you know, he didn't cost the state. If somebody looked more long-term at the value of that boy...
Oh, absolutely. I think if we invest in our young people now, if we invest with people in you know, with special needs who need that extra support, we're going to reap the dividends in years to come, you know. And I think, if I could just make another point as well, when we talk about access to education and people getting to education, in my own area in Dundalk, for example, in Dundalk Institute of Technology, we now have 4 out of the 5 students who attend there are actually the first generation of people to pursue third level education.
And Mary, on that note, I just wanted to bring in John, if I may, just because of my own experience with DCU and the work that they do with Ballymunnon. You were a resource teacher in Glasnevin, weren't you?
Yeah, I worked as a secondary school teacher for 13 years, and 11 of those were in Glasnevin, and most of that was spent as...
we can't hear you, so...
unfortunately, you might come back to me later on then.
No, I think we'll probably be able to hear you in a second.
You can hear me now, okay, grand. Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally in any school, and this was something, when you're becoming a resource teacher in a school, you become a voice for students who often are voiceless. Not only outside the school, but sometimes inside the school. And I mean, rule of thumb, you know, when it comes to children who have special educational needs, is that anything that we do in education must start with looking at their interests first and then filter out, because they're the most vulnerable. And that's the approach I've always taken in school, and that's the approach that all special educational needs are asked to take. And the challenge is to deliver that. I mean, it's kind of turning a boat, which at one stage, and many people who would be my age and maybe a little bit older would realise that when they were going to school, there were kids in my class who would I would now know that they were dyslexic. But at the time when this chap who lived beside me in school was fantastic at technical drawing, he got an A in honours maths, but he couldn't write his name in English. And we just saw him as different because he wasn't diagnosed. But the supports that are there now to ensure that people who are gifted, but sometimes maybe gifted but need supports in other areas that are a little bit
John, we'll talk. I'm going to talk to you again in a minute. I just want to give the final comment actually to John O'Sullivan. You've taken on some huge issues in the education field. You're fearless.
I have to be fearless in that job, Nora. Absolutely.
I hope my son isn't going to miss any more days at school, though. Fearless as you are.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think what Labour Party people are very passionate about education, first of all. It's a core issue for us, and it always has been. And it's an extraordinary privilege to be a Labour Minister for Education. But skills is also in my title, and that's why, you know, I think the area of apprenticeship and having alternative streams is very important. I think what everybody has said, and I absolutely agree, education has to be inclusive. It has to take the young person from where they're at. You know, whether that is a child with special needs, whether it's a traveller child, whether it's a child whose family hasn't had a tradition of having higher education or indeed any kind of educational opportunity. So what we want to do, and what I want to do as Minister, is to ensure that we offer all of those young people opportunities and second chance, as Joanna has talked about, so that really we are a country of opportunity. And I think education is absolutely core to all of that. And indeed, in relation to the previous discussion, in terms of giving people the opportunity to get meaningful work because they have a meaningful skill
and the skills to get
training.
the jobs. We're going to thank you, Minister, and we're going to move to another area which is pretty important too. We're going to take another question. This time it's from Dr. Mark Murphy. He's a GP from Dublin Bay South. Thank you.
Thanks, Nora. I'd like to ask the panel about their vision of how we can achieve a universal healthcare system, which is so sorely needed. So firstly, universal, free at the point of access to GP and primary care services. And secondly, more complicated perhaps, how are we going to change this terrible inequity that financial means governs how you access secondary care? And I'd like you to explore that, because many international, European, academic bodies question the value of competition, particularly multiple competing insurance companies. Are they going to have the best interests of patients at heart? So the particular brand of UHI with multiple competing insurance companies, is that right? Or should we explore other avenues of creating that equity?
Thanks, Mark. Busy practice?
Very busy, flat out.
And you see a lot, I'm guessing because you asked the question, you probably see a lot of the issues that you're talking about now.
Yeah, general practice. We are SMEs. We've been hit with FEMPI cuts. Minister Lynch is engaging with us on a new contract. But what we need is general practice to be resourced, and we need a total population contract so that everyone can see us free at the point of contact, and we support that process entirely.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So I suppose inevitably I'm going to come to you, Kathleen Lynch, but also I suppose, you know, I lived in Britain for a long time and we had the NHS, Nye Bevan's great dream, free at the point of delivery, but it had its own way of rationing and they were called waiting lists.
Yes.
And I know it's a long cherished goal of the Labour Party, but do you think it's unreachable at this stage?
Well, we have difficulties, and I very much appreciate the question from Mark. And could I say that, as busy as you are, Mark, I hope that in the very near future that you'll be even busier seeing all those under 6s and over 70s. And I know that the agreement that was reached just yesterday with the IMO in terms of progressing to the more general contract, I believe will enhance primary care as well.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's a memorandum of undertaking that if we can get the under 60s and the over 70s across the line, which I believe we will, and the IMO have been instrumental in doing that, teasing out the type of issues in terms of whether or not children will get 2, for instance, health checks a year. They have been instrumental in teasing out those types of issues, and we believe that we're very much nearer now to doing that.
Nearer as in a few months?
Nearer as in a few weeks, hopefully.
Ooh, okay.
But it is very much dependent on whether or not we can convince GPs, as Mark rightly says, that the type of resources that they will need will be there for them. And Brendan Howlin has set aside 37 million in order for that to happen, but we believe we'll need more. And again, that's a second discussion that's going on in the background.
Just on the funding issue, if we're talking about universal health for all or universal access to GP for all, we're also talking about costs. So is you know, what's your own belief? Is it general taxation so that we can provide access free for all, or is it through some government-inspired health insurance scheme? Well, or the competing market that we have currently?
I believe it should in fact be through general taxation, but the difficulty we have, and I would say not just in this country, I think we're not that different. I believe that people want services, but they don't want to pay extra taxes. And hopefully with the economy picking up, and I think it is all interconnected, with the economy picking up, that increase in taxation will give us the flexibility and the ability to deliver more.
Maybe people feel they're already paying for it through taxation, though.
Well, we are. I mean, and I don't disagree with that.
So to do an across-the-board increase in taxation
I don't
might be
disagree
difficult.
with that, but unfortunately right now there aren't enough of us paying, and because not enough of us are in the economy that's making a contribution in terms of what we can bring into a central pot so that we can distribute it wider. So I agree with that concept. But the wider concept that Mark talks about, and I believe that all care in the first instance should be at primary level, and that's why the under 6s and the over 70s is so important, our youngest and our oldest is so important. And we do intend then that if we get agreement on that it will move on to children of 11 just finishing primary school, and I heard a conversation a while ago, and then up to 18. Now what we do after that will be an issue for someone else and the next government. But could I just say, in terms of the general whether or not we should have a competing mechanism in relation to who pays for, if you like, the acute hospitals, the waiting lists, who pays for the type of interventions that we will all eventually need in terms of how we live and how we don't live. I would have to say that I would come back to GPs. We've had a system in this country where GPs, their waiting rooms are full every day of the week, and no one knows whether you have a medical card or I'm paying, or I have a medical card and you're paying. And that GPs see those people on the basis that they're the next person in the list and they're in there, and that's the system we've introduced. Now, it took a bit of time, but we have introduced that system and it works extraordinarily well. There is no discrimination in that waiting room. I believe that the Labour Party should be promoting a mechanism of a common waiting list for consultants.
But I appreciate that, and I hear what you're saying, but are we going to give up on the idea of universal healthcare for all?
Well, it depends. It's complex. You know, there are academics all over the world looking at this. It works in some countries, one model works in some countries, a different model works in a different country. But really, that's an argument, Nora, that we have to have as politicians and as the people, if you like, negotiating behind the scenes, like we're negotiating for the additional money in relation to primary
Kathleen,
care.
we'll come back to it, because I
Yes.
think most people thought it was coming and then it wasn't coming and then it might be. So we'll come back to it at the end, though.
But it's complex. It's complex, and I think it's something that we need to take more. I think what happened when the government came into being, I think we were too ambitious. Too ambitious in that. Now, ambition is a good thing, but we were too ambitious in terms of universal healthcare. But our ultimate goal should be that the service should be free at the point of delivery, and it really shouldn't, as Mark rightly says, be a competition between someone who can pay for the service and someone who can't.
Okay, well done, Kathleen, thanks. And Joe Costello, we share the same space, at least we did for a while. When I went off to train as a nurse, I almost ended up in the Mater Hospital. And there you were bravely for 10 years, almost single-handedly, solo, every Saturday down there campaigning to make the Mater Hospital a better place, and it is a better place. But I know your constituency.
Thank you.
Your constituency is incredibly complex and diverse. So it's not just about the Mater Hospital, is it?
Of course it's not, but if I had known that you had been living in the Phoenix Park, I would have invited you along to some of those.
I was in that
protests
A&E department.
every Saturday afternoon from 1 to 2. But really what happened was that all of the things that you've been talking about there and Kathleen has been talking about creates that logjam on accident and emergency, because we had a relatively dysfunctional system, still to a large degree, because of that 14 years under Fianna Fáil and the PDs, which concentrated on an extra tier under the HSE, building private hospitals in public areas, and really very little was delivered. So now we find ourselves with a logjam at the end of the road with the A&E. And what happened in the case, my case, was that this little old lady who was 89 years of age, her family got on to me after she had been 4 days sitting on a chair in the Mater Hospital. And her birthday was coming up on the Saturday, which was exactly a week. That was 3 further days down the road. And they asked me if I could do anything. I got onto the bed section in the Mater Hospital. They said, well, look, we'll do what we can, and we'll ensure that it's there by the birthday. She'll be in a bed before her birthday. I called in to see her. She said the one thing she wanted was her grandchildren to see her in the bed, and the toys and all the rest of it, and the flowers on her birthday, her 90th birthday. And then I thought everything was fine. And then when I contacted the hospital again, and they told me everything was great, she was taken out, she's gone home, and so on. The family contacted me a week later to thank me for what I had done and to tell me that she had been taken out in an ambulance. She had never gone into a bed, she had been on a chair, and she had died on a chair in the Mater Hospital after 7 days on a chair on her 90th birthday. So I decided after that we just could not but highlight the issue. And I did it for 10 years,
10 years
with the Labour Party in Dublin Central every Saturday for an hour. There was 20 to 30 of us there. And then one day the Minister for Health came along, Mr. O'Reilly, and I was still a minister when I was doing this, and Minister O'Reilly came on to me and he says, look, I'm sick and tired of you marching up there outside the Mater Hospital every Saturday. I'm putting a stop to this. And I said, how are you going to do that? I'm opening the new accident and emergency next week.
Well done.
So that happened.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joe. I come to you, John Kelly. So it's all right for us in Dublin. We may complain about the hospitals and the A&E departments and the long waits, but we do have them, and they're not very far away. But you're over in Roscommon.
Correct, yeah. Unfortunately, for years since the Hanley report, the HSE were always looking at ways of closing the A&E in Roscommon, and that's why there were so many hospital action candidates down through the years. But back in 2007, I wrote to Professor Drum, where there was a real threat to the A&E at that time. And I asked him, because he said he was going to put a better service in place. There was going to be more paramedics, more advanced paramedics. He more or less would lead you to believe that there'd be a paramedic at every crossroads in the country. So I asked him to put that service in place in tandem with the A&E being open for 6 months, just to prove to the people of Roscommon that it was a better service. He never did that, and then in 2011, Enda Kenny announced the closure of it, purely because there was safety concerns in the A&E. Now, in any other area of health in this country since then, where there was safety concerns raised, they invested in them to deal with the problem. But in Roscommon, they closed the A&E.
John, can I just ask you mentioned paramedics. How important do you think that is in terms of rural infrastructure?
Absolutely vital. In Roscommon now, we have areas like Castlereagh, Ballahadreen, Strokestown and Elphin, in particular, with very poor ambulance cover. Now, 2 to 3 weeks ago in my own town, a young 19-year-old lad got a heart attack. He was dead by the time the ambulance came after 40 minutes. So because of that, I raised the issue with Minister Varadkar 2 weeks ago, and I told him that we have a lack of paramedics and advanced paramedics in the west of Ireland. I told him we need another 100, so he committed to giving an extra 50 paramedics for the west of Ireland. I also made another proposal to him that to me makes sense, and that is because we have firemen in every town in the country, and that 4 out of every one of the crews should be trained up to at least first responder.
Couldn't agree more with you.
And he agreed with it.
Yes, and the paramedics, and if we rolled out Dublin Fire Brigade in the rest of the country, it would actually make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So, thank you, John. We're going to move to another questioner and another area from Dublin South Central. We have Marie Moynihan. Fire away, Marie.
Okay, equality has always been one of the core values of the Labour Party, and it's actually the reason why I joined the party. So I would like to put my question in 2 parts. Firstly, I would like to ask, when will we see paid paternal leave introduced into this country? And secondly, I would like to ask, how are we going to ensure that the thousands of soft votes that exist at the moment can be turned into hard yeses for the upcoming marriage equality referendum in May?
Very clever, Marie. Sneaked in 2 questions there
yes.
in your 1 question.
2 important equality issues, though.
2 very important equality issues. But we'll go straight to Minister Eoghan O'Riordan. So first of all, I think that Marie was talking about parental leave, but can I talk about paternity leave? Because we still don't have a statutory provision for that. I heard you talking about it recently. 2 weeks. How far away are we from doing that?
I think it can happen this year. We had a discussion about this last night, and I made the point that over the last number of years we've kind of dehumanised a lot of our conversation when we interact with each other. We've talked about being taxpayers, we've talked about living in an economy, and unfortunately for some people the greatest ambition that we have for ourselves is to be the best little country in the world to do business, and that's not good enough. We have to be the best little country in the world to raise a family.
And what's stopping us doing it?
Well, maybe it's political will, maybe it's the values of the Labour Party that people need to row in behind more. And when you look at what is the norm across Europe, paternity leave is something that they take for granted. If you look at Iceland, their family leave and their value system when it comes to family leave is absolutely remarkable, and it gives a whole different meaning to having a new child in your family and the leave that you might have.
Business owners?
Sorry?
Is it employers and business owners?
I think we can have a conversation with employers, with unions, with civil society groups to come on board with this. What we're asking is to have potentially 2 paid weeks of paternity leave, so that when somebody has a new child in their family, it's not something that they need to juggle work with, and that our society says, you know something, this is an important time in your life, and we as a republic will back you in this important time in your life, and we will step up to the mark as a country to bring this in. I think we can do it this year, and I think people in this country will want us to do it this year.
Great. I think there's a wider issue, though, Eoghan. You know, I know the value of paternity leave because my husband got it when I had my child, and ever since then, even as a small SME, even when I bought the business to start with and didn't have any money, I always did 2 weeks paternity leave for the men in the company. But even then, we don't have employers who understand that family involves both a man and a woman. So after, I employ a lot of women and they all get good maternity leave, and when they come back and the child is sick, the husband's employer doesn't understand that actually the husband should on occasion leave and pick up the child from childcare. So it's always the employer of the woman who has to take the brunt of lost hours.
Yeah, I think what you're moving in now into a space that we're beginning to talk about now, which is gender equality, which affects men and affects women. because in the past we've discussed gender equality on the basis of women's rights, and we were right to do that. But now we have to step up to the mark and say that this affects men as much as it affects women, it affects children, it affects our families. And I think men are coming on board with that. Like when my mother came to Dublin from Cavan back in the day, and she was working in the civil service, she got married, she lost her job. That's the kind of republic that we handed to Irish women back in the day. In this generation. That's my mother, and that's the type of Ireland that is still in the consciousness out there. Yeah. We have to have a whole different conversation about the value system we have. Let's move away from a conversation purely based on tax cuts, which is justifiable when people feel they're under pressure. But talk what Kathleen is talking about in terms of service provision and what we really want to invest in. And I think investing in families and children and those early stages of early intervention that only families can do best in many respects is absolutely vital.
Elaine, I'll come back to you.
From an equality point of view, and I think this is strictly what we should be looking at, and I know it's in terms of what will be delivered to men, but in fact the compound effect will be that employers know when they're looking at women to employ, the first thing in their heads won't be will she be on maternity leave, because they will have to apply the same standard to men as well.
Exactly.
And it actually will have that effect. But the other thing we need to take a serious look at, because the Child and Family Relationships Bill is going through the Dáil at the moment, I mean, are we going to apply it not just to men, but are we going to apply it to same-sex couples who have an adopted child, or surrogacy, or all of those things? So it is quite complex, but I think the effects of it and the unforeseen consequences are that it will actually bring a value to women as well in terms of employment.
But I can also say, though, Nora, if I might,
yep.
2 weeks paid paternity leave should be a start of the conversation. A start of the conversation.
And it shouldn't be part of maternity leave. It should be additional.
Agreed.
It should be additional.
Agreed.
Not about swapping. I wanted to bring in Ivana Bacik, because no more than myself, well, I'm a single mum now, so I know what it's like, but you juggle family life and responsibilities for children with not the most family-friendly of working lives, I have to say. So I guess we've talked about the Swedish model, we've talked about all sorts of different things that we could do to improve it. What's best for families and for children?
Well, Nora, I think critical for families and for children is that fathers would get some recognition in the workplace. And I think it's great to hear Aon and to hear the debate last night committing the Labour Party to working for 2 weeks paid paternity leave as a start, but a very important start, because it would be the first recognition that fathers as fathers get in the workplace. And I know myself, when I had my daughters, it was so important, even for a few days, that their dad could be at home, helping to bond with them. It's about children's rights too, and it is also, as Kathleen has said, about the women are no longer seen as the primary carers in the workplace. So I think it's a hugely vital part of Labour's equality agenda. And like Marie, I joined the Labour Party to campaign for equality issues. I was inspired by Mary Robinson and Michael D. Higgins when I was a student way back in the 80s. And, I think this is a hugely important part of our equality agenda as Labour now, is to work for fathers' rights, to ensure that this year, while we're part of the government, that this government introduces for the first time ever paid paternity leave that only fathers can take, and that gives them the recognition in the workplace that they and their children and families
and
deserve.
not juggling the maternity leave so that they divide it between the two.
Yeah, I mean, maternity leave is hugely important, and I'm glad, I think part of the motion was about enhancing and strengthening maternity leave too, going into the future to look at how we can ensure, as with the Swedish model, that there can be some leave taken by mothers and by fathers. But currently the situation is terrible for fathers. I know loads of dads who've had to take sick leave, holiday leave, just to have a few days to bond with the new babies. And we have a lot of new babies in my extended family at the moment, so it's very much on our family agenda too. So I think it's really important for Labour to take this on.
And keep your tweets coming in, by the way. You can see them coming in here behind us on the stage. So it's hashtag LP15, especially on that discussion and on the one we're going to move to, because John, one of the most passionate and strongest campaigners on marriage equality, but I think most people feel the opinion polls mightn't be telling us completely the truth. How do you move those soft yeses to hard yeses?
I think the upcoming referendum on same-sex marriage is a hearts and minds story. It's about channeling life experience and a human story and expressing the human story of some of us to our fellow colleagues and friends, our brothers, our sisters, our people in our community, and letting them know why this is important. It's not going to be won by politicians standing up and saying that this is important to vote yes, for equality and same-sex marriage. It's about, when people see the human face of the inequality that exists. And I was just thinking, Nora, you mentioned your husband earlier on. I wasn't quite sure whether you're married, but you're married as such. So I was sitting there thinking, you can probably remember the day, like people sitting at home here right now, or people in the audience, when they found the person that they loved, and the moment when they decided, this is the one for me. And you know what that feels like more than I will, because you've found that person and you've asked that person, and it's a magic moment. And gay and lesbian people have that moment too. It's no different than anybody else, and we have to remind people of that. It's the exact same. It's the exact same. But the difference is our society at the moment tells us, but because we are gay and lesbian, that moment that you experience as the same as every other citizen in this society, you cannot access that institution in our society that gives you all the legal protections that you should have as a loving adult couple in a committed relationship, and we call that marriage. And we are saying the time has come to change that, to recognise every single citizen, gay or lesbian or straight, that the love that they share between those two people must be recognised as being equal, and anything less than that is not acceptable in today's society. Okay? Could I just say very quickly?
John, I'm not finished the conversation, but she who must be obeyed is about to come into the room, so I'd like to welcome the Taoiseach and the Labour Party leader, Joan Burton. TD, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. Actually, here's a little known fact. Joan Burton and I went to the same school, but I think she studied a little bit more because she did rather well. She was the prefect. Éanna O'Riordan, I was going to bring you in on this conversation because I heard an interview with you the other day, and you said you were deeply worried that we'd all wake up the day after the referendum and we would realise that it was a no, and that we'd be sending a message out to the world on the eve of 1916 that Ireland really wasn't about equality at all. Do you think there's complacency in this referendum?
I think there may be a little bit of that. I think anybody, though, who hears John Lyon speak knows that this is so important. It's important for our republic. You know, Martin Luther King famously said to the American people, you know, just be true to what you said on paper. And what we're asking people before 1916 commemorations, be true to what you said on paper in the proclamation: equal rights and equal opportunities for all our citizens in this republic. Nobody was raised, you know, none of us were raised to sit in the back of the bus, but we have to appeal to people's humanity, and we have to appeal to Middle Ireland mammy and Middle Ireland daddy that this is what they want for their children.
But that's the key, Éanna.
It is the key.
You know, I think you could bottle John actually and send him around the country, but the key is that you're dealing with a different constituency.
I think there's an important message that have to go out. If you have questions or doubts about this issue, you're not homophobic, you're not prejudiced, you're not bigoted. You're just there to be convinced. And the thing about a referendum is that people could be 95% there, and the 5% is what the no side will use and abuse and manipulate and play upon. What I'm trying to do in terms of saying what it will feel like the day after a potential no vote, which won't happen, is to use a little bit of what the only thing they have is fear. So maybe we should use a little bit of that to motivate ourselves about how we are going to go out on doors every single week. I'm out already. I'm out every Saturday, knocking on doors in this issue. People are engaged. They want to vote yes. They want this to happen for our country. It's going to be a great day when it is passed.
Well, hopefully it is going to be a great day. Kathleen, can I finish just this conversation? Because we didn't talk about mental health issues, which I meant to come back to you on in the first question, because that's, well, close to my heart, incredibly important. And you're rolling out a programme for change.
Well, we are. And I think that we have made incredible progress on it. The fact that there is not a television, a radio programme, a conversation in a pub, a conversation in school. You know, Mental Health Week is coming up now. All of the different schools that want me to visit because they have programmes running for the entire week. I think we have made incredible progress. And the progress we've made has been in relation to, as John describes, the hearts and the minds, the attitudes, the different attitudes, the fact that it is now seen as acceptable that people have difficulties with their mental health and that there is recovery. It's not the sort of enduring, you're going to vanish for the rest of your life circumstance that people found themselves in before. We're not there yet. I keep telling people that, and I'm not certain we ever will be there. This is going to change. How we view people that have difficulties with their mental health has changed already. How we deliver a service will change. Okay. But really, myself and Jan O'Sullivan launched a document a number of weeks ago introducing a programme for good mental health or mental fitness into primary schools, which really is where it needs to start.
There's some great initiatives out there. I work closely with Green Ribbon Campaign.
It's about ensuring that at a very young age, that we don't dismiss. You know, the film, and I know I'm going to offend someone here, and it's not like me, as those who know me will know.
You'll have to do it very quickly if you're going to offend them.
And Angela's Ashes,
I thought you were going to say 50 Shades of Grey.
No.
Oh, God. Like, oh, no.
50 Shades of Grey, I think, would depress me more. But Angela's Ashes was just one of the most depressing films I've ever watched in my life. But what it taught me was that children feel humiliation. And they feel it not just on behalf of themselves, but they feel it on behalf of their parents and on behalf of their peers and on behalf of their siblings. We need to get in there very, very early. We need to give them the type of resilience that is necessary so that they can get to our point in life, Nora, where the slings and arrows, yes, they affect you, but you're able to get back up from it.
They don't affect you at all. You're just so used to the slings and arrows. And at throwing them, by the way. Keep the tweets coming. It's hashtag LP15. Lots of them coming in. I need someone to pull together this. This is a very complicated and complex conversation. So we're talking about health, education, gender. Janice Sullivan, will you do the honours?
I will indeed.
Thank you. Well done.
Thanks very much, Nora. And I think I'll begin by quoting from Marie, who asked the last question, when she said that she joined the Labour Party because equality was at the core of our values. And indeed, Ivana has just repeated that as well. And I think for all of us, equality is at the core of our values, and that's why we're members of the Labour Party. I also want to quote Joe Costello, because Joe, when Nora was asking Joe about his campaign on the Mater Hospital, Joe told us a story about a 90-year-old lady who very, very sadly died sitting on a chair for 7 days. And that was the story of an individual whose sad story inspired Joe to stand outside the Mater Hospital every Saturday with his colleagues to campaign for a better service. And I see Paddy Behan there just walking out. And Paddy talked last night about the Labour Party, again, being about people, that people being at its heart. And people are at the heart of the discussion that we've just had. Equality in educational opportunity, equality in access to health services, so that you get your service on the basis of your medical need, not on the basis of your ability to pay. And that is at the heart of our health policy as well. But I want to finish by an issue that we all are actively and strongly campaigning on right now, and that is marriage equality. That is the next decision that the Irish people are going to be making. And we have to get a resounding yes to that question. And we have to win over the hearts and minds of Irish people. And in some ways, maybe I'm the kind of person that we're talking about, been married for donkey's years, was able to make that commitment many years ago. John Lyons talked about the difficulty of somebody who has found the person that they love, the person that they want to spend the rest of their lives with, but because they're gay, they cannot make that commitment. That is not equality in a republic, and that is not something we can stand over as members of the Labour Party. So we have to win this election. We have to win over the hearts and minds of the people who may not have thought about what it might be like not to be able to get married if you meet the person that you love and the person you want to spend your life with. We have to win those people around, and we have to do that by being very clear that this is an equality issue. This is an issue of ensuring that every one of our citizens in the Republic of Ireland has the same rights as those of us who have had these rights for many years. So I think this debate has been very strong in terms of the core values of equality issues for the Labour Party. But the one that we are now faced with winning an election on is marriage equality. Let's go out there, let's win the vote, let's campaign fully to win the hearts and minds of Irish people on this very, very important issue. Thank you very much, delegates.